How are you?
Doing
Good?
good. Yeah.
That's good. So,
Waiting for the party.
You're ready.
Man, that was loud. Okay. Yes, I am waiting for the
Yeah,
party.
okay.
But yeah.
Well, we thought you were sleeping, but it's okay. So when I was reading the things that you have done the last 1.5 years, it was amazing. I don't know how many of you are following him, but I think it's important to follow you. And for me, it was impressive to see that you have given some TED Talks.
Yep.
And how long does it take really to prepare such a talk?
So it took me about 2 years to come up with a proposal, and then you just attend interviews and pitch yourself. Yeah, it's a long, cumbersome process. It took me close to 2.5 years, and now I have 2 TED Talks. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow. Amazing. There are people who's preparing keynotes here for years, but then didn't make it. Really. Um, So thanks so much for being here, my dear. Enjoy your audience. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, that's brave. Okay, I'm going this way. I grew up as a shy, introverted kid. My dad was super smart. My brother was a genius. And there I was, the average kid who didn't do well in anything. You name it, sports, academics, dating. I was average in everything, right? And also, I constantly kept comparing myself with other overachievers around me. I wanted to live up to their expectations. But every time I tried to do that, I ended up getting disappointed because I realized I could never live up to people's expectations. It was close to impossible. And where I come from, you don't ask questions. You follow things as it is. And if you challenge the status quo, you get reprimanded for it. So all these experiences made me develop stress, anxiety, and depression at a really young age. And I turned to food as my coping mechanism. For much of my life, I looked nothing like the skinny, handsome Asian guy you see standing before you today. I actually look like this. And this is not photoshopped. This is the real me about 5 years ago. I was tired of living this life because I was so depressed. So when I finally entered the workforce, I decided that, you know what, I'm going to change this. So when I started my IT career, I said yes to everything that came my way. I worked really hard. I pushed myself out of my comfort zone. And as a result, I exponentially increased my salary by over 150% in 10 years. And I'm not exaggerating. I was a rated star performer in 6 out of my 7 companies. And I had all this fame and credibility which I earned within the 10 years. And I thought that was life. But later, this fame and credibility made me into someone who was toxic. And I had to get caught red-handed to confront my actions. So one afternoon at work, my boss called me in for an impromptu one-on-one meeting. And she said, "Hey, Raj, I wanted to confirm something with you. In one of the annual performance reviews I got for Jane, I see quite a few sentences which starts with statements like, be a leader like Raj, be a creative thinker like Raj, be a team player like Raj. I find it quite odd that someone would use your name this many times in giving feedback to another employee. So I'm just going to cut right to the chase and ask you this. Were you behind that anonymous feedback?" I paused for a moment, confused, flustered, shocked, speechless, all at the same time. And then I said, "You know me. I'll never do such a thing like that." My boss asked me one more time for clarity. "So are you saying you didn't write this feedback?" I said no, and I lied. Then I went home. My wife was out of state at a conference, and I, being alone, started smoking cigars, started drinking, started taking extra anxiety pills, and had multiple panic attacks. I wasn't myself. My legs were shaking, my hands felt numb, my entire body was trembling. I could hear my heart pounding. I desperately needed to talk to someone, but there was no one there to listen to me. I tried calling my wife several times, and after multiple attempts, she finally picked up the phone. And she said, "I'm available only for a couple of minutes, but what's going on?" I was crying profusely, thinking about how to get out of the situation and put myself in. Because that's the thing about toxicity. When you affect other people, the toxic residue still remains on your hands. You can either try to hide it or come clean. My wife reassured me that things were going to be okay, and the only way to get out of the situation was to come clean. But even then, I was trying to hide my toxic residue. I did 4 30-minute rounds of meditation, thinking I'll get some ideas to get out of the situation. Like in the movies, where a person does meditation and gets this sudden awakening, and magically he or she will think about something that changes their lives. Yeah, that did not happen to me that day. During the many hours of thinking about what to do, I went out to my balcony in my high-rise building, 50 floors. I started thinking about why people commit suicide. Because I get it. When you face extreme shame like this, it feels like an easy way to end the pain and suffering. But of course, I was not going to jump because I had an awesome wife and I had this huge bucket list of things I wanted to do, which, by the way, also includes me stuffing myself with chocolates and pastries when I eventually go to Paris. Yes, that is going to happen one day. But the thing is, even then, even in the midst of it all, it was a shame of getting caught that had gotten to me. Facing your own toxicity is a process, and shame is often the first part of the cycle. So I went back into my apartment and started writing down all my feelings. I looked at it for about an hour over and over again. I could visually see who I had become and what I was going through for several years. Suddenly, everything became so real to me. And I realized I had become a toxic leader. And it was time. It was time for me to make a change. I've spent the past 8 years helping people understand that we are not born toxic leaders, but our environments shape who we are. I lived that world being toxic, thinking I was a good guy. Later, I realized there's no such thing as the good guy or the bad guy. We are all one guy, and we are all both. We all have dormant insecurities, and it just gets amplified during stressful situations. Once I started studying and analyzing my own toxic traits, I was able to get out of it, and now I help other leaders in tech do the same. A perfect example for this is one of the clients I was working for. So she was an engineering manager at a mid-tier company. She did everything to help her team. She was there to support them, gave them enough training. She worked around the clock for them. She came to me in August of 2019, and she said, despite slogging for her team for over 2 years, she got really negative feedback. In fact, she said she got the worst performance review in over a decade. And she was overlooked for salary increases, bonuses, and promotions. So we started diving deep into what is happening. And after understanding her situation, I suggested the following things. First one is I asked her to schedule one-on-one meetings with every team member in the team. Because when you're in a closed setting within 4 walls, people are more prone to open up to you. So that's the first thing she did. The next thing I asked her to do was show her vulnerability. So I told her to let the team members know that she was ready to change. She's not perfect. She wants to do the best thing for the team, and she's ready to learn from them based on the feedback. The third thing was a little hard because once I started talking to her, I could see she had a slightly elevated ego because she had 24 years in IT, experience in IT, and she thought she knew everything. But I told her that I'm going to challenge you. In that 1-hour meeting you're going to have with each and every team member, you're going to talk only for 2 minutes. And for the rest 58 minutes, you're going to let the team members talk. And then she said, OK, I'm up for the challenge. And that's what happened. And finally, I asked her to take copious amount of notes because I wanted to figure out patterns based on the feedback to see where do we need to start and what do we need to improve. After interviewing each and every team member, she had about 20 people. This is what she found. The team thought they were forced to attend trainings, even if those trainings were irrelevant to the job. She thought it was best for them, but the team thought it was a waste of time. She never celebrated success. Research has proved that when you celebrate small milestones with the team and accomplishments, people are more prone to do more work for you and more encourage. The team morale increases, but she didn't celebrate success. In fact, one of the feedback was she was not approachable and she never had a smile on her face. Yeah, they were really hard on her when it comes to feedback. Another feedback was she did not socialize with the team. She found time to attend leadership meetings and hang out with them, but she never socialized with the team, and the team noticed that. She skipped team meetings to attend leadership meetings, and she had someone else to substitute for her most of the times. And she just came after the meeting ended to ask the person who substituted for her for a 3-minute update on what happened. She started taking credit for other people's work. And the team hated that because they slack for hours to finish stuff, and then she'll just come in the last minute and say, oh yeah, you did right based on what I said. And the team hated that. She never used to take the blame for anything which happened wrong which happened in the team, and she used to finger point the blame to her direct reports. And finally, the most interesting, fascinating, and the funny part was people who she thought were the people who liked her the most were actually the people who hated her the most, right? And this picture is interesting because she thought she was the world's best boss, but apparently she was the total opposite. She was a toxic leader because her actions were detrimental to the workplace and affecting the team. But once she was able to do the 4 steps at the top, she was able to gather that feedback, and once we started working on it for over 6 months, she was able to earn the trust of the team, and she also got promoted to an engineering manager, right? So if anyone has gone through this experience or going through this experience, keep those 4 steps in mind. But the point is, this is a testament that toxic leaders can change. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. I was going to cover 3 things, which is going to be important for everyone, especially if you get into a leadership role or leading teams right now. First thing is, how do we become toxic leaders in the first place? Next, what are the 3 environments that leads to toxic leadership? And finally, how to come out of being a toxic leader based on my real life experiences. So let's start with, how do we become toxic leaders in the first place? So toxic leaders like myself were often known as the good kids growing up. We followed the rules, we tried our best. But the thing is, there's this very innocent-looking road that slowly leads one from being a sweet young person to one whose actions negatively affects those around them, whether that's the intention or not. And that seemingly innocent-looking road looks exactly like the one we are all on right now. Like in the middle of a pandemic, at a state of high emotional stress. It's a moment in time when we get caught up in survival, forced to focus more on how we are rather than who we are. Every one of you listening right now is a leader, is in his or her own way. You may have been in a position of leadership at school, at work, or even at home. Regardless of the place, the very moment you interact with people, you are going to make decisions that are going to affect them. And the kind of decisions you make determines the kind of leader you are. So the other day I was reading some articles on toxic leadership because I thought I'm going to talk about it. Why not educate myself more about it? And I found these interesting statistics. 56% of the employees in the United States deal with toxic leadership. 73% of them have claimed to work with a toxic boss. And toxic leadership is not only a problem in North America, it's a global problem. Let's take some examples for that. How many of you have heard of WeWork, which provides co-working spaces? Okay, most of you, great. So WeWork was founded by Adam Neumann in 2010. It was one of the fastest growing startups in history. At one point, it was valued at over $47 billion. The way Adam motivated his team was he said he was going to change the world, and everyone is going to get rich in that process. He also said that he's going to solve world hunger. So the team was super motivated to work with him. And they overworked themselves, they put in so much effort, and the company became part of their identity. But as and when Adam started seeing success, he slowly started doing things which were detrimental to the workplace and affecting team morale. But he did it anyways because he wanted to succeed at any cost. As a result, in the end of 2019, he was asked to leave his own company, which he had founded. And at the time of leaving, the value of the company had reduced by $30 billion. Adam was a toxic leader. Let's take another example. Boeing, they were working on their 737 MAX best-in-class airline. There were huge expectations for it. So because of that, the leaders pushed their employees to work extra hours. And in spite of knowing that there were production flaws and design flaws, they released the product. As a result, in 2018 and 2019, there were 2 fatal crashes which killed 364 people. And as a result, Boeing had to pay $2.5 billion in damages. And further investigation found that there were toxic leaders in Boeing who were constantly ignoring people's feedback, and they released the product anyways. So yes, toxic leadership is a global problem. So let's just take a step back first and define who is a toxic leader, right? Let's start with the basics and then give some more context on this. A toxic leader is a person who has responsibility for a group of people or an organization and who abuses the leader-follower relationship by leaving the group or organization in a worse condition that it was in when he or she first interacted with them. So that is the definition of toxic leader. In a video which I'm going to show you, you're going to find out the effects of toxic leadership and how it can affect a company from a growth standpoint. So let's just check out this video quickly.
So we're here to talk about toxic leadership and toxic employees within organizations. Now, this is not a new phenomenon by any stretch of the imagination, but the reason why it has come up more and more is because of the type of incidents that are occurring in the workplace and the type of behaviors that actually employees are exhibiting in the workplace as well. Counterproductive work behavior is exactly as it sounds. It's behavior that is counterproductive to an organization, whether it's financially or operationally. Now, there's a great cost to counterproductive work behavior, or CWB as we call it. In North America alone, over $200 billion is lost in revenue every year due to CWB. And in the United States, it is estimated that up to 30% of businesses close due to toxic employees and toxic leaders in the workplace. Now, the question of...
So yes, toxic leadership, again, is a global problem, and it can cost a company billions of dollars. So let's talk about how do you know you're a toxic leader? That could be the obvious next question, right? You would think you're perfect, like how I was thinking I was perfect, but then I started going through these feelings. You'll start constantly comparing yourself with other people. Your self-worth is driven by your latest results. You cannot celebrate other people's success because it makes you feel angry and jealous. And you're constantly looking out for people who are your competition and trying different ways to overtake them, even if the ways are unjust. This is how it starts. This is the first phase of how you know you're a toxic leader. Then you go deeper. You start seeing and experiencing these kind of feelings. You are constantly stressed, anxious, and depressed. Your mental and physical health starts deteriorating. You're becoming secretive about strengths and weaknesses because you don't want anyone to know what's happening. You're withholding important information so that you can succeed. You're lacking proper sleep because you know you're guilty of your actions. And then you take antidepressants and other medicines to numb the pain. You seek loopholes to help you grow faster. You live in constant fear of being ignored. You constantly take credit for other people's work. That's the second phase which you go through. And most of all, you're more concerned about you than other people. I know this. These are the things that tax leaders go through because I personally went through all these feelings. And after some analysis, I found that when you're in stressful situations, you can start doing things which you never wanted to do in the first place. For example, like the current pandemic. The pandemic is a breeding ground for stress. In fact, according to the American Psychology Association, nearly 8 in 10 adults say that the coronavirus pandemic has caused a significant source of stress in their lives. And most of these people are in leadership roles. But how are they coping with the demands of work coupled with survival? The thing to notice here is, no one is 100% toxic. A person isn't a 100% toxic human being. We all have toxic traits, and it gets amplified during stressful situations like the pandemic. So let's take an example for this, right? Do you know there were some glaring similarities between the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic and the 2020 COVID pandemic? So in the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, Woodrow Wilson was the president, and he decided to focus on war instead of the pandemic. And similarly, in 2020, we had President Trump, who focused on other agenda items, including his re-election. And then 675,000 Americans died, and 3% of the population were wiped out during the Spanish flu pandemic. And then during COVID, 714,000 Americans have died, and the number keeps increasing. And in both the cases, there were more deaths in the second wave compared to the first, and they neglected science and research. Now you may be wondering, why the hell am I showing these differences, right? That is because in both the pandemics, the leaders were highly stressed. For example, Woodrow Wilson was the president during World War I, and he was under high state of stress, but at that time, no one thought stress was something which would affect leadership. Similarly, in 2020, President Trump was in a lot of stress because he was surrounded by a lot of unrest when it comes to immigration policies, racism, and his re-election campaign. In both the cases, the leaders were completely desensitized from their actions. They started sanctioning policies after policies which were affecting people, but they did it anyways, and they got numb towards it, right? They didn't have any feelings. And finally, in both the cases, the leaders were highly insecure. They chose to focus on things they were in control of, and they wanted to prove to people that they're able leaders, and they ignored things where there were a lot of unknowns like the pandemic. And the reason why I chose this example is all leaders can become toxic when they go through these 3 environments, and that's what I wanted to talk about. What are the 3 environments that lead to toxic leadership? You have a high state of stress, state of emotional numbness, and a space of insecurity. Let's talk about one by one, and then you're going to get more context about it. Let's talk about stress. Again, anyone can become toxic leaders, and it gets amplified during stressful situations. Unfortunately, I had to deal with this for quite some time, and it took force awareness to have the ability to identify situations that could compel me to respond in a toxic manner which is not both healthy or supportive. We all have to go through this at some point in our lives, right? Where we start to analyze our actions and thoughts and start figuring out patterns and start figuring out the reasons why we act in a certain way. Forcing yourself to recognize these patterns is what force awareness is all about. From my thick, deep German accent, you already probably know it's not born here. So I grew up in the southern part of India, living in a small location called Chennai, and was born in a conservative family. I was the average Joe. Well, in India, I was the average Raj, because that's one of the most common names. And focusing on academics was not really my thing. I had other interests and passions, like hanging out with friends and playing outdoor sports. By the way, I was never really into indoor sports, including playing video games. Yes, I'm a rare nerd rare exception for being a nerd. But the point here is, at a young age, I started developing this inferiority complex, believing that I wasn't good enough. This led to horrible feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, stress, and high self-doubt. So when I entered the workforce, I took a vow that I'm going to change this, and I'm going to make people respect me. In life, if you want to make people respect you, you may do the following. You'll work extremely hard. You'll build credibility so that people start noticing you. You'll start saying yes to every opportunity that comes your way. And you'll try to earn as much fame and money as possible in the work you do. That is exactly what I did as well. But remember, life shapes itself based on the things you say yes to and the things you say no to. And one of the consequences of saying yes to everything is that you overwork yourself. For over a decade, I pushed myself so much that I went back into this place of stress, anxiety, and depression, which I once wanted to escape. And this gave rise to a lot of toxic habits and actions that were affecting other people, but I did it anyways because I wanted to succeed. Ultimately, when these toxic traits are repeated consistently over a period of time, it makes you desensitized towards your actions. And that is the next environment to look out for, that is a state of emotional numbness. Research has found that people become emotionally numb to protect themselves from further pain and suffering. You are your actions, even during times of difficulty. Remember, the toxic residue still remains on your hands. Growing up, I was always the underdog. I had this constant fear that I was disappointing people because I could never live up to their expectations. And also at a young age, I noticed that if you're in charge, you can make people do anything you wanted to, or at least that's what I thought. So when I finally got into leadership roles, I felt I was in control. I was in charge. It was a boost to my ego. I decided that people are going to listen to me whether they like it or not. Little did I know that my own experience working with other toxic leaders made me act and think like one. I have become a toxic leader. This led to a series of actions that I started displaying over a period of time that became a normal part of who I was. I was completely desensitized from my actions, which were affecting people and detrimental to the workplace. And yes, one of the consequences of being in charge is giving bad performance reviews. But the main reason why I was following all these questionable practices was that I was highly insecure about myself. Your insecurity is your worst enemy. It's like a tumor which grows bigger and bigger and starts affecting every single living organism around it. Let me ask you this. How many people have insecurities? Okay, most of them. Spoiler alert. So for people who did not raise your hands, you probably have more insecurities and it's time to make a change, just saying. But the point is, I personally feel men are more insecure than women. In fact, the other day I was talking to a friend of mine. He said his wife was going to leave him because he was highly insecure, only to later let me know, 5 minutes later, that, oh, never mind, she was just picking up groceries. You see, insecurity filters through the cracks and gets to you over and over again. You have to be mindful of it when it rears its head. And that is the next state to look out for. That is an environment where there's insecurity, especially job insecurity. Research has found that there's direct correlation between job insecurity and mental health. Now more than ever, people are anxious about what will occur in the future. And this creates feelings of insecurities that increases the likelihood of one tapping into their own toxic traits, especially those in leadership roles. I was highly insecure throughout my childhood. And when I finally got into leadership roles, I decided that, I'm going to change this. And I thought people should always notice me, and I should always be in the spotlight. The hunger for recognition. I'm pretty sure most of you can relate to this. The willingness to do anything to succeed. But the reality was I was highly insecure about myself and my job. I thought people were watching every step I took. But the actual reality is, no one cares about what you do. They see only the actions and the results. So, when you start noticing patterns where you're becoming defensive, you're not receptive to feedback, you're constantly micromanaging the team, you always want to have the final word, and you always want to hog the limelight, even if the smallest opportunity opens up, then you're highly insecure and it's time to make a change. I'm the living proof that power and credibility can still make you feel isolated and empty. It could create feelings of insecurities that could propel you to do things which are detrimental to others. Ultimately, I want everyone to feel some empathy for toxic leaders. Again, empathy does not condone their actions, does not excuse their actions, but rather gives them permission to deal with their insecurities and be vulnerable. We all have toxic traits. It just shows up differently in each one of us. One big challenge is we are living in this cancel culture society. We see instances of people messing up, being toxic, and getting completely shunned from society because of it. So although the actions of toxic leaders are inexcusable, they are afraid to admit to their mistakes because they feel that if they do, they'll be barred from society. So their actions go unabated. Yet, when you see the person behind the actions and bring the behavior to the leader's attention, you can give permission to other toxic leaders to be vulnerable and deal with their insecurities. And you can help other toxic leaders come out of the closet. For example, I still remember this. The first time I got into a leadership role, I was super pumped, and I thought I should be involved in everything. Every communication, every meeting, every email chain, pretty much I should be everywhere. And within the first 2 months, I started getting overwhelmed, stressed, and I started missing deadlines on critical tasks. And I still remember this moment vividly because I was on the 8th floor, and then I was coming down to the first floor via the elevator. And once the elevator opened up, one of my direct reports came to me and said, "Hey, Raj, you seem really stressed. Are you okay?" I said, "Not really." Then he said, "Could I give you some feedback if you don't mind?" And for once in my life, I left my ego aside, put my ego aside, and for some reason, I think the universe gave me this aha moment, and I said yes. And he gave me examples of how I was micromanaging the team, how I was losing respect from the team, and the things I was doing wrong. And that one decision to leave my ego aside was pivotal for me coming out of being a toxic leader. So how can anyone get out of being a toxic leader? Start being open and honest about your problems. Notice patterns and triggers early on. Start writing them down, analyze them, and take action. Open up to a trusted partner. It could be your significant other, it could be your boss, your mentor, your therapist, whoever that may be, who can give you an objective view of what's actually happening and what actually is going on. Shift your mindset from fame and money to actually serving and impacting people. As I said, within the first 10 years, I increased my salary by over 150%. I was earning more than directors of engineering because I just got promoted so fast. And I thought fame and money was everything. But as I was saying, it made me feel isolated and empty. Then I shifted my mindset to serve people. That's when I got real joy of leading teams and helping people. And that's why I do what I do right now. I do leadership coaching, right? And it just brings me joy. So that is something you really need to keep in mind. Show your vulnerability. Let people know that you're not perfect. Say that you committed similar kind of mistakes, but tell them how you got out of it. That's a good learning experience as a leader. Research has found that when you show vulnerability, it increases trust with the team. So think about it. And finally, put your ego aside. Your ego is your worst enemy. So we talked about how an individual can get out of being a toxic leader. But now let's talk about at an organizational level. How do we reduce toxic leadership in your organization, right? That is the last section I wanted to talk about, especially if you're in charge of bringing change in a company-wide initiative or something like that. First, let's refresh our memory. in terms of what are the effects of toxic leadership. So there's workplace bullying because of it. There's counterproductive work behavior, which we saw the video. They explained what CWB is. There's psychological distress, and people suffer depression and burnout. According to a study, 60% of the people in tech suffered burnout, but most of them don't even know that. And one of the major reasons that happens is toxic leadership. So these are the effects of toxic leadership in an organization. So how do we reduce them? So let's talk about that. First thing is building an environment with the psychological safety. How many of you have heard the word psychological safety before? Awesome. I thought I was the only nerd here who reads things like this, but looks like more 3/4 of you are nerds as well, so which makes me happy. But let's just go over the definition. So psychological safety is being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. In a nutshell, it means that creating a space where people can speak up, not have fear of being judged, challenge the status quo, and knowing that the team has his or her back. So that is an environment of psychological safety. Before we get into the 5 steps to build psychological safety in organizations, for all the nerds here, I want to talk to you about this podcast. It's called Work Life by Adam Grant. How many of you have heard of Adam Grant before? Okay. He's one of the most world-renowned organizational psychologists. He's employed by Microsoft, Google, and so many other big companies. He's also a professor. He studies this. He's a New York Times bestseller, blah, 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 and the resume goes on and on. But he hosts this podcast called Work Life. It's amazing. He talks about different work issues which happen and how to deal with it through interviews, research. It's just unbelievable. Highly, highly recommend subscribing to the podcast. And by the way, I don't get paid for promoting this podcast, but it is really awesome. But the reason I'm showing this picture is I want all of you to specifically listen to this episode. Is it safe to speak up at work? Because they talk about psychological safety, how to implement it, what are the challenges, what are the limitations, what are the advantages. It's really, really awesome. So that's the nerd moment here. But coming to the actual ways to create psychological safety, it's a 5-step process. First, make psychological safety an explicit priority. So, as a leader, you need to first explain what psychological safety is to the team and tell them that you want to build diverse and inclusive work environments where people are free to speak up and challenge the status quo. And also, let them know that everyone is working for a higher cause, the company goals, right? And each person's work is important. And also lead by action. Start by showing empathy at work. And then when you show empathy, you model that behavior and everyone starts following that. So that's the first step. The second step is facilitate everyone speaking up. Be open, compassionate, empathetic to people who challenge ideas. That helps to build a coaching culture within the company, which means that it encourages more people to speak up, and then you can foster newer ideas. Establish norms for how failure is handled. That's the third step. Don't shoot the messenger. Don't shoot risk takers. When I say shoot, I don't want to be violent here. It's a figure of speech. But the point is, don't punish them, because the risk takers are the one who can bring innovation, generate new ideas. So if they commit mistakes, instead of punishing them, let them know how you committed those mistakes and got out of it. Make it a learning experience. Fourth, create space for new ideas. So as a leader, it's your responsibility to establish protocols of what type of ideas do you want to hear. Half-baked ideas, or you want prototype ideas which are fully documented. You as a leader establish the protocol, then people are more prone to follow that protocol and they have a structure. And finally, embrace productive conflict. So when there's conflicts, instead of ignoring it, embrace it. But the thing you could do is establish structure in terms of how one person can bring objections about another person or an issue in the project, and how do you mitigate that? Come up with a structure and let the team follow. So this is how you create psychological safety. Then you have pay-to-quit programs. How many of you have heard of pay-to-quit programs? Okay, some of them here. So let me ask you this. How many of you have had this feeling, you wake up Monday morning and you say, oh man, I have to go to work. How many of you have had that feeling before? Okay, thanks for being honest. And I've had that feeling a lot of times. But the problem comes into picture when you have the same feeling 365 days a year. Then there's something really wrong. And that's what is happening right now, where there are a lot of people who go to work and they just warm up the seat and do the minimal amount of work because they don't want to leave the company because they want financial safety, they want to support the family. But at the same time, the company is losing productivity on them because they are not working to their highest potential. This is a common problem, and people want to solve this. So Zappos came up with the pay-to-quit program when they started, way back in, I believe, 2005, 2006. Even now they follow it, where after the 3 months of training, new hires are given what is called the graceful leaving policy. It's a document, and it states that if you cannot adhere to the standards of Zappos when it comes to customer satisfaction, then they can leave and they'll pay them 1 month of salary, right? And when they say powered by service, they really mean it. Because in December 8, 2012, a customer rep had a 10-hour, 29-minute conversation with the customer explaining different ways to settle in Las Vegas. And they thought a customer is #1 priority, and she didn't get reprimanded for it. They thought it was part of her job. So they really mean when they say powered by service. And then Amazon bought Zappos in 2009, and now they have a pay-to-quit policy as well, where you get paid $5,000 every year to leave the company, right? And what this does is it gives permission for the employee to leave the company with some financial security, and at the same time, the company doesn't lose its productivity and avoids a lot of unnecessary legal issues. So that is something to keep in mind. Then you have anonymous help hotlines. The first company I worked for in the United States, they had this, because not a lot of people are open to complaining about the toxic actions they are facing because they have the fear of being judged by their employees, or they think it may lead to further toxic actions. But if you have these anonymous help hotlines, they are numbers which directly connects to the HR, and you can make the complaint and they'll take your name out of the complaint, and that provides a safety net. And then finally have open conversations. It could be through all-hands meeting, one-on-one conversations, team meetings, and those are some ways you can reduce toxic leadership. So in summary, I talked about 3 things. How do we become toxic leaders? What are the 3 environments that lead to toxic leadership, and how to come out of being a toxic leader? If you want more resources, check out this link. I wrote an article for InfoQ, which I wrote a month ago. It's read 25,000 times. It's one of the largest, highest read article on their website. That's because apparently toxic leadership is a global issue. And definitely check this out. And also, I have a Facebook group where I have a lot of leaders, managers, directors, where we talk about these issues. So if you're interested, you can just type in Skyrocket Your Career in the Facebook group, and you'll find my beautiful face here. That means you're in the right group. And then finally, so I do a program every year for different leaders called the Growth Accountability Program, where we have all these leaders in one group, only 8 to 10 people. We discuss what goals we have for 2022, and then we try to strategically achieve it, and also talk about all these issues, and then crowdsource solutions and make them effective leaders. So if you're interested, definitely go check it out. So to summarize, this is what I want people to know. If you're a leader, and in any of these environments, that is, environments of stress, environments of emotional numbness, environments where you have insecurity, then recognize that it's not too late to make a change. You can rebuild trust once it's broken, and show the courage and vulnerability to deal with their insecurities and make a change. Remember, change starts with every individual, every leader, and you are a leader in your own right. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Very, very nice. Questions?
Hey, Raj. I'm sorry. One of the things I feel is that there are a lot of leaders in this world and in this industry that are highly successful and highly regarded by society, even though there are a lot of signs that they're probably toxic leaders.
Right.
And so success just gets mixed up with that. And what do you think about how can we kind of like turn that thing around and also like bring focus to toxicity, regardless of the success that's associated with it?
I think as a leader, you have to constantly retrospect and write down your feelings about what you're going through. If you start recognizing some of these patterns, which I showed in the slide, where you're feeling insecure, you're secretly trying to think about ways to succeed and stuff, that means that's a trigger. So you know, okay, something is up. Start writing down those feelings and talk to someone who can really help you cope with that, your trusted partner, significant other, whatever that may be. That's one way from your standpoint, from a leader standpoint, you could try to come out of it. Another way is if there's a friend or colleague who really cares about another employee. For example, say you were a toxic leader, and then I've been noticing it, but I really like you in terms of a friend, I would say, hey, could I give you some feedback if you don't mind? And if they say yes, then just be frank and open, because that's what changed my life. So those are the two ways. You trigger the change, or someone else helps you trigger the change. But just be cognizant of what you're doing as a leader. Notice those patterns which I just mentioned, and that's the way to get out of it. So,
More questions? Ladies first.
Hi, Raj. I'm very interested in work with the ego, and you said ego is our worst enemy. In the same time, ego is a set of behaviors that we built to to make us secure. So ego is very strong because its mission is to keep us safe, even if it destroys us.
yep.
So I would like to know what are your the means that you found to soften the ego, because just saying get rid of the ego, it won't go away.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So again, it's a case-by-case basis based on a person's character. But for me personally, I could talk to my experience. My wife, she's the cornerstone backbone of everything I do. And once she started noticing patterns, and I said, honey, I don't know why I feel like this. Then she started talking to me. So that was, since she said, honey, I know you're super successful, super rich, but you really need to tone this shit down, right? Then I started seeing a therapist. So that helped me to reduce my ego. Highly recommend therapists for people because they don't give a shit about you in terms of an objective view, right? So you're not related. And then talking with some mentors. I still have those 3 leaders who made me who I am today. For the past 15 years, I have monthly calls with them. And then, even though I coach other leaders right now, but I constantly keep learning from other people. So those are the 3 ways that I reduce my ego. And then I got into this whole, it may be woo-woo stuff right now, but I got into this whole meditation and mindfulness space. So I have a really, really, really high tolerance for stuff. But once it goes past that, I go crazy. But the point is, yeah, I did meditation and mindfulness. So those are the 4 ways I actually reduce my ego. I still work, it's a work in progress, but I'm a lot better. I'm very frank and open, so.
Alex?
So if you're a manager of a manager who you think might be toxic, or you're working with someone who thinks that a manager on their team might be toxic, what should you do?
So again, it's a case-by-case basis. So one thing is, just to make sure I understood your question, so you're working in a team, if you think a manager's toxic, what do you do, right? If you're managing them and a team, and you were toxic.
No, if you're managing someone who's managing a team, and you think that the person you're managing is a toxic.
Oh, just to make sure I repeated the question. So it's like what's that movie? Yeah, Inception. It was like a question and a question and a question. Exactly. Thanks. you get a free gift from me. But the point is, so the question was, you're managing another manager who's managing a team, and if you know that that second manager in this whole story is toxic, what do you do? That's where you have one-on-one conversations. So I've had this situation before. So during a one-on-one conversation, we ask about, hey, how's it going? What obstacles are you facing? What is the progress? And if I see that they're lacking in something, or something looks quite odd, then you just have an open conversation, number one. Number two is peer feedback. So you not only meet with the manager, but you meet with the other team members occasionally during team building activities, or have occasional one-on-ones and say, how is everything going at work? You just ease it out. Usually I take them for a beer, then they open everything like this. Or I attend a party like the party which we're going to have. But the point is, you just, choose a good atmosphere and ask them, hey, how's it going? Then you can start seeing signs based on the face. They may be hesitant to ask. They'll say, if they're hesitant to answer, I would say, oh, is there something going on? You can tell me, and whatever we speak is between us, and you can trust me. So once you establish that trust, then they're going to spill out everything, and then you can take corrective actions. You have to nip it in the bud. Because for me, unfortunately, no one did that, and I did a lot of toxic things, and then I felt really bad. But now, yeah, I can see the signs if someone is toxic just by talking and working with them for a little bit. So hopefully that kind of gave you some ideas. So,
more questions?
Raj, you did that because you were confronted by your leader and you were lying.
Exactly.
About how you were managing people. So, I mean, that's the way to get out of it. But then again, you can never be certain that someone is lying to you, living in their dream world about being the perfect manager.
Exactly. So she brought up a good point, which I didn't mention during my talk. So the next day, after I'd gone through all these feelings, just in a few hours, I scheduled a one-on-one meeting with my boss. And I forgot to say that. But the point is, I scheduled a meeting with my boss at 7 a.m. in the morning. And then the next day she said, why did you schedule this meeting? I said, I had a lot of time to think. And I was behind the anonymous feedback. And I finally confessed. She said she knew all the while that I was behind the anonymous feedback, but she was just waiting for me to come out clean. But she said she thanked me for being open and honest. And she said I did the right thing. And then I went ahead and scheduled a meeting with Jane. I've, of course, changed the name to let her know what has happened. So, yes, one way to get change is getting caught red-handed, which that's what happened to me. So,
because you were actually confronted with it.
Yes.
So, you were lucky.
Yeah, I could be lucky. Or another thing was, remember I told the story where one of my direct reports came to me when I was in the elevator, and he said, you seem really stressed. And then I left my ego aside and answered. So that was also a pivotal moment. Yes, it was a matter of luck, just like everything in life, and actual recognizing what is actually happening. Because if I'm popping pills to sleep every day, then there's seriously something wrong. So,
okay, thanks so much. Last question. Do you want? Yeah, that's fine. We have a mic. Sven.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful talk.
Thank you.
For an employee that has a toxic leader, which is obvious. It's not. I'm not speaking for myself, but from.
It's okay. This is a safe space.
It's for a friend. It is for a friend. It's for a friend. It's for a friend.
How can that employee push that toxic leader to that point that this toxic leader realizes that he or she should change?
Right.
But not have problems coming out of that.
Exactly. So, yeah. So, that's a great question, right? So, I think there are two aspects to this. One is, if a person is outspoken as me, I just take them, schedule a one-on-one meeting with them, and then let them know that, hey, you know, the other day you called me out in the meeting and berated me in front of the team, and I felt really bad. And also, you took credit for work which I was doing. The next time, I would really like it if, you know, mention my name as well, because I worked hard. I appreciate you for what you're doing, but also, you know, it'd be great if you include me, right? So diplomatically, for outspoken people like me, that's how I bring up any issue, even with my wife. Honey, I know you're scared, or I know you're pissed, but, you know, I hear you. Let's talk about that. Then it calms the person down. But on the other end, there are people who are not outspoken. So what do? That's when it gets tricky on a case-by-case basis. So if you know another manager who is this manager's friend, and if he or she is more open to hearing you out, maybe in a team meeting or something, saying, hey, Raj, can I just talk to you for a couple of minutes? Oh, yeah, sure. I always talk to people. I like people. So, and you would say, you know, I've been working with Adam for 3 months, but I feel really insecure and feel really scared to bring up issues because he takes it the wrong way. But I'm telling this in confidence. I don't want my future to be, future in the company to be hurt, right? That is another approach. Or approach the HR, saying, and they're binded by confidentiality, client and HR confidentiality. I don't know the right term for it. So go to the HR and complain and say, I don't want my name to be in this. That's it. I think that would be a great way to do it. But I just believe in just talking to the person first, because I'm that type of person. I'm not the person who keeps all the feelings for 10 years and then put that in the performance review and give a 0 rating. So I'm not that kind of guy. I just want to face and confront things. But yeah, hopefully that gives you an idea. The HR, indirect manager, if you're an introvert, or if you're an extrovert like me, just have a one-on-one conversation in a closed place. So
thanks so much. We have open positions, so. Just saying.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Great talk. So, my dear, it was amazing, but I was not expecting less. I have to say that. My dear, here, take it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me again. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.